All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Let us begin. I want to begin by thanking our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Cheshvan. To thank Meir and Rachel Gold for dedicating all the Sherman drushos this month in memory of Yonah Tzvi, then Yosef Chaim Elazar HaKohen, and Noam Leah Efron for dedicating all the Sherman drushos this month in celebration of the 98th birthday of Noam's grandfather, Yosef Hershel ben Mordechai Halevi. We thank our Daf Yomi sponsors, Dr. Moshe Ann Ellen Gavant, as well as Natan Leah Berry, for dedicating the shir today in commemoration of the first yartzheit of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, Harav Yaakov Tzvi ben Dovid Aryeh. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, his neshama will have an aliyah and his family a nechama. We also take the opportunity to dedicate our learning in the schus of Refuah Shalema for Steve Golaskov's father, Nachum Sender ben Itarachov, who underwent complex surgery and is now recovering. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, he will have a complete and enduring refuah. But also with that, let us begin. So we have an incredible daf ahead of us today, a lot to do. Today's daf is Yud Zayin, but you wouldn't know it based on where we're starting. Right? So we are picking up in Yartzeit Hashem on Tes Zayin on days 16b, and we are picking up Amr Yitzchok Dalid Dvarim Mekarin Dino Shel Adam. Mekarin Gzar Dino Shel Adam. So I'm actually going to count down from the top. It's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Actually, no. We left off earlier, right? Gimel Dvar Masker Vanoso Shel Adam. Is that right? Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah, so 2, 4, 6, 8, 7 lines down from the top. Good. We will be fine. Amr Yitzchok. I will say incredible Gemara. Amr Yitzchok. So we did there are three things that cause a person's judgment to be brought to the forefront. So in other words, or three, literally translated, three things that cause a person's averus to be remembered. What are they? Elohein, kir natui, a slanted wall, right, which means a wall that is about to collapse. Iyun tefillah, we'll just define what that means in just a moment. Umoser din al chavero, and one who goes ahead and literally, Moshe din al chavero, Rashi says, Kimo yishpot Hashem beini ubeinecha. That refers to someone who says who demands that HaKadosh Baruch Hu pass judgment on another human being. So we'll say, if we analyze this for just a little bit, the idea is, Kir Natui is a situation of a person going in and placing themselves in mortal danger. So when you place yourself in mortal danger, essentially what you're doing is you're relying on a miracle. When you rely on miracles, that requires the Beis Din Shalmala to actually go ahead and decide, are you worthy of a miracle? Well, how do you decide if someone is worthy of a miracle? So I go ahead and we look at their averos. Look at their averos. So by definition, it creates a sense of judgment. Rashi explains, over tachtav maske avonosav she'omer klum roi zel la'asos lo nes. Fine. Iyun tefillah. So we'll say, what's wrong? So that's kir natui. So kir natui, I'm relying on a miracle, forcing HaKadosh Baruch Hu to go ahead and examine my deeds. Am I deserving of a miracle or not? Second one is iyun tefillah. This is really quite fascinating. Look at Rashi. Iyun tefillah. Somich al tefilaso shetehei nishmaas umisamitz lekavin libo. So, if you look at Rashi, this is fascinating. Rashi, what's iyun tefillah? A person relies that his tefillah will be heard, umisamitz, and therefore he works very hard to have kavanah. I don't know. Sounds pretty good, right? What's the problem with iyun tefillah? So I will say, if you take a quick look at Tosis has a different idea. Tosis iyun tefillah. If you skip down to the last three lines of the short lines, Tosis says, Kilomar ma'ayin ba omer belibo she'asu bakashaso lefi she'hispalo bekavana uba lidei ke'ev leiv kishe'in bakashaso nasis. Tosis says iyun tefillah refers to someone who davens with the explicit expectation that God is going to automatically fulfill their request. Says so again, I daven and I expect that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to go ahead and fulfill my request. Tosa says, it skips a little bit at the end of the first line, wide line, Shayidekach, mefasvisin b'ma'asav, kilomar, boteachu b'schuyosav, v'nira mahim, o meshanihu dema'ayin ba, delo ma'ayin b'hashta havu kohani shoshesvos. The idea over here, according to Tosis, is that iyun tefillah is really davening with a certain level of gaiva, where a person has an expectation that his prayers are going to be answered. See, I both say tefillah, we're going to discuss this a little bit later on the daf as well, requires humility. And humility says, I'm going to daven, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm going to daven for what it is that I believe that I need, and I truly hope and pray that you will grant that, but I also recognize you run the world. And because you run the world, that which I think I need, or that which I think is best for me, may or may not be best for me. Tefillah always requires this level of kavanah. So to daven, says the Gemara with a sense of gaiva, that almost like magiali, I deserve it. This should be coming to me. Says Tosas ultimately again, Kadosh Baruch Hu says, really, you think you deserve it? You think it's owed to you? Well, let's check that out, right? Let's go ahead and look at your averos. Let's look at your mitzvahs. Let's do a little bit of an internal spiritual audit and see where you're holding and see if in reality you really deserve this. Umoshe Dina Chavero, the last one, Moshe Dina Chavero, is a person who wants HaKadosh Baruch Hu to judge his fellow. Then I will say, to ask the Ribono Shalom to judge someone else must mean that what? You're pretty confident about yourself. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, really? You want me to go ahead and judge someone else? Well, if you want someone else judged, let's start with you. So therefore, again, Yitzchok says, these are three things that almost trigger this judgment of the individual in Beis Din Shalom Allah. Number one, expectation of miracles. You put yourself where you expect a miracle. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, let's see if you deserve it. Number two, iyun tefillah, davening with arrogance, with an expectation that I deserve and I should get everything that I want. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, let's see. And number three, Moshe Dina Chavero, to stand in judgment of someone else presupposes that your personal affairs are in order. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, let's see. The Gemara goes, right, whoever goes ahead and literally wants HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Moshe Dina Chavero literally means you give judgment on your friend, which means that you feel that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should judge your fellow, hu ne'enash tchila. Such a person is judged first. It literally means punished. It means judged first. Shnei Amar, v'atomer sarai el Avram chamasi alecha, uksiv vayavo Avraham lispod l'sara v'lifgosa. This speaks Parshas Chai Sarah. So it's interesting. The Gemara says Sarah got very angry at Avram because she felt she was being disrespected by Hagar, and ultimately again, Avram was not defending her. So she says to Avram, my degradation literally again is upon you. Yishbot Hashem beini u'beinecha. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should judge you. And then the Gemara says, this Gemara attributes the fact that Sarah predeceased Avram to the fact that she wanted HaKadosh Baruch Hu to judge Avram. Incredible, just in general, incredible. We're going to see a number of Gemaras like this today about how we have to refrain from judging other people and how we have to refrain from being judgmental about other people, because the consequences of adopting that type of, the consequences of living like that boomerang against me. So even Sari Imenu, the Gemara says, is negatively impacted by the fact that she felt that HaKadosh Baruch Hu deserved to be judged by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Amar Rabbi Yitzchok, Daled Dvar Mekaran Dino Shal Adam, Gzar Dino Shal Adam, both say beautiful Gemara. Rabbi Yitzchok says, there are four things that tear up the verdict of a person. In other words, that if I have chas v'shalom, a negative verdict, that these four things could go, we'll call it a negative judgment, that these four things could cause that judgment to be ripped up. Eluhin, these are they. Tzedakah, it's tzedakah, charity. Tzaka means tefillah, calling out in prayer. Shinui Hashem, changing your name. V'shinui Maisa, and changing your actions. So the Gemara says, how do I know all of these things? We'll explain what they mean on a deeper level in just a moment. Tzedakah, how do I know that tzedakah has the ability to tear up a bad gizar din, a bad verdict, bad judgment? Tzedakah saves from death. Tza'aka dichsiv, vayitzaku al Hashem batzar lahem, umtzuko sehem yotzieim. So we'll say pasuk from Sefer Yonah. I'm sorry, from Sefer TALMUD, excuse me. So the pasuk says they call out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu when things were difficult, and Hashem saved them. So you see, prayer works. Shinoi Hashem, changing your name, changes your judgment. T'chsev Sarai ishtecha lo sikra eshma Sarai ki Sara shma. Uksiv, and right after the name change, ubeirachti osa v'gam nasati mimena lacha bein. Right after the name change, Sari Imenu is blessed with a son. Shinoi Maisa, how do the changing one's actions goes ahead and changes one's gzar din. T'chsev vayar Elokim es ma'asehem, uksiv vayinochim Elokim al hara asher diber la'asos lahem v'lo asa. The pasuk says, this is from Sefer Yonah, right? You saw the people in Nineveh, they changed their actions, and as a result of their change of actions, HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided not to go ahead and punish them. Others say, in addition to this list, is also changing your geography, changing your makom. The chsiv, first wide line, Vayomer Shal Avram, Lech Locha Me'artzecha, V'hadar V'escha L'Gai Gadol. The Pasuk Hashem says to Avram, leave your land, and then he says, and then I'll make you a great nation. So Meshana Makom, Meshana Mazel. Change your geography, right? Change your place, and you change your mazel. Why doesn't the first opinion include this? V'idach hahu zechusa de Eretz Yisrael hu da'ahanyale. So beautiful. That's not a din in Shinoi Makom. That's the schus of Eretz Yisrael. That when you come to Eretz Yisrael, when you go to Eretz Yisrael, the land itself infuses you with merit to be able to achieve the brachos that you could not have achieved outside of the land. Absolutely beautiful. I will say, so just a word about this. Yitzchok therefore tells us there are 4 things that have the ability to change one's gizar din, a negative judgment. Tzedakah, charity; tzedakah, calling out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu; shinui Hashem, changing your name; shinui Maisa. Both say, what do all of these things represent? So tzedakah represents sin, right? Sin in general is a result of egocentricity. Right? The reason I commit an Aveira is because I put my needs above everything else. My needs are above someone else's needs, if it's ben Adam l'chaveiro. My needs are even above God's needs, if it's above ben Adam l'makom. So ultimately, what's the antidote to that? Tzedakah. Because what is tzedakah? Tzedakah is I take something which quote unquote belongs to me and I give it to the other. What do I do when I give tzedakah? I demonstrate that the needs of the other are more important than mine. Life is not about me. I can't go ahead and think that I'm the center of the universe. I have to go ahead and think about others. Next, tzedakah. We'll say, what is tzedakah? Tefillah. By definition, what is tefillah? What's the core principle of tefillah? I am not in charge. I am not in charge. Tefillah says, the Ribono Shel Olam runs the world, not me. Shinoi Hashem and Shinoi Maisa, changing your name, changing your actions, is a willingness to change. A willingness to change. A willingness to change who I am, changing my name. A willingness to change how I behave. Shabbos, if you take all of these things, tzedakah, thinking about others; tzedakah, I'm not in control, because Baruch Hu is in control; Shinoi Hashem, changing who I am; Shinoi Maisa, changing my actions. The common denominator amongst all of these items is humility. Humility. Humility is the bottom line common denominator. And what Rabbi Yitzchok is saying is that if you want to tear up the gzar din that may exist on you in life, a person wants to tear up a negative judgment, humble yourself. Because if I'm able to humble myself, everything positive comes from anava. Everything positive comes from humility. All of these things, tzedakah, tza'akah, shinoi Hashem, shinoi Maisa. If I'm humble, I could accomplish a lot in life. If I'm a Baal Gaiva, pretty much the only thing waiting for me is chait. Incredible. From Rabbi Yitzchok, Chayiv Adam Lahakpil Pnei Rabba Berega. I'll say just an unrelated statement. I mean, it is related because it's Rabbi Yitzchok. A person is obligated to go ahead and visit his Rebbe on Yom Tiv. Shnei Amar, Ma'adua at holecha selav hayom, lo chodesh velo Shabbos. So we'll say this is the Isha from Shunam, who used to host Elisha Hanavi. She built him a room. He blessed her with a child. The child passed away. The woman didn't tell her husband. She was so distraught. She's going to visit Elisha. And her husband says to her, why are you going to visit Elisha today? It's not Chodesh. V'lo Shabbos, it's not Rosh Chodesh, it's not Shabbos. Michlal de b'Chodesh v'Shabbos iboy leila mezel. So you see from here that on Rosh Chodesh, Shabbos, Yom Tiv, ultimately again there is an obligation to go visit one's Rebbe. On Rabbi Yitzchok, Chayiv Adul Mutaris Hatzon B'Regel. Person is obligated to go to the mikvah before Yom Tiv. Right? Go to the mikvah before Yom Tiv. Well, it literally means to purify oneself before the regal. Shnei Amar, Ubeniv Lasam Lo Sigo. I'll say interesting limud here. The pasuk says, you should not go ahead and touch a nevela. Because remember again, a nevela, an animal carcass, has the ability to convey tumah. So you shouldn't touch a nevela. So Tanya Yachid, Ubeniv Lasam Lo Sigo. Pasuk says, don't touch a nevela. So the Gemara says, Yachol, Yisrael Musharin, I'm not going to Ve'ila, you might have thought that Klal Yisrael, a Stam Jew, not a Kohen, should not be able to touch in the Ve'ila. Tambalomar, Amar LaKohen B'nei Aaron, B'nei Aaron Musharin, B'nei Yisrael, Ein Musharin. Kohanim can't touch an Avela because they can't contract Tumah, but it's Stam Yisrael. If I want, I'm Yisrael. If I want to make myself Tameh, I have the right to make myself Tameh. Balodram Kavachomer, Uma Tumah Chamura, Kohanim Musharin, Yisrael in Musharin. So we'll say it's a good Kavachomer. Tumah Chamura, like contact with a corpse. Right? Kohanim cannot become Tameh. Is Yisrael permitted to become Tameh? Is Yisrael permitted? Absolutely. Sometimes it's even a mitzvah, right? To go ahead and become Tameh by attending a levaya, by coming in contact with a mace. So if by Tumah Chamura, more intense Tumah, Kohanim are prohibited, Yisraelim are mutarin, Tumah Kalala Kol Shekin, certainly again by a lesser form of Tumah, like by Nevela, there's not going to be any prohibition against the Yisrael becoming Tameh. So the Gemara says, so what does it mean when it says, don't touch Nevela? It means on Yom Tiv. It means on Yom Tiv. So I will say, from this pasuk, the Gemara is learning out the idea Chayiv Adam Lataris Atzmo Lifnei Aregel, that before Yom Tiv, a person is obligated to go ahead and purify themselves. And I will say, in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, this was clear and intuitive because you had to be Ola Regel. You have to be Ola Regel. But there is a concept like this, that even if a person doesn't use the mikvah regularly, that there is a concept of going to the mikvah prior to Yom Tiv, so that one enters into Yom Tiv in a state of ritual purity. Amr Krispudai, I will say perhaps the most famous Gemara in all of Maseches Rosh Hashanah. Amr Krispudai, also because Rav Krispudai only appears twice in Shas. So Rav Krispudai says, Ram Yochanan, Shloshet Svarim Niftachin, Rosh Hashanah. There are 3 books, 3 Svarim that are open on Rosh Hashanah. Echad Shal Rishon Gimurin, one for the perfectly righteous. For the perfectly wicked, right? Completely wicked. Echad Shal Tzadikim Gimurin, one for the perfectly righteous. Echad Shal Beinonim, and one book for the in-betweeners, right? For the Beinonim. Beinonim are not Tzadikim. Beinonim are not Rishon. So what happens with the 3 books? Here we go. Tzadikim Gimurim Nechtavim V'Nechtavim La'alta L'Chaim. So Tzadikim Gimurim are immediately written and sealed in the book of life in the Sefer HaChaim immediately. I both say. Now remember again, what I want to point out, based on our conclusion from the Sugya, right, when the Mishnah said that B'Rosh Hashanah Kol Ba'ei Olam Ovim Lefanav Kibnei Maron. Remember, we adopted the model that said Rosh Hashanah is judgment, but judgment is sealed when? Yom Kippur. Now remember again, here of Krisadai is saying is like this. Tzadikim Gimurim are inscribed and sealed immediately in the book of life on Rosh Hashanah. They don't have to wait till Yom Kippur. There's signing and sealing on Rosh Hashanah. Rishaim Gimurim, unfortunately the wicked, Nechtavin v'Nechtavin la'alta l'misa. So the absolutely wicked are immediately inscribed and sealed for death on Rosh Hashanah. Beinonim teluyim va'omdim me Rosh Hashanah v'ad Yom Kippurim. The Beinonim, right, the middle of the rotors, so they're kind of suspended. They have suspended sentencing until Yom Kippur. Zachu, if they merit, Nechtavin l'chaim. Ultimately, again, they are inscribed for life. Lo zachu, if they don't go ahead and if they're not zocha, then ultimately again nechtavin lemisa, they are inscribed for death. Now I will say there's so much to say about similar Krispedai, the Rishonim, the Achronim, in the Rambam, the Ravid, everybody jumps on this statement. Because Rabbi Silber, Krispedai kind of puts out such a one-dimensional view of how judgment works. But yet, there are plenty of tzaddikim who die every year. There are plenty of rishaim who live and thrive every year. So how exactly this model kind of goes ahead and plays out is the subject of much debate. What it really gives to us is a framework, right? And the framework ultimately of the fact that there are 3 books. There are 3 books, right? There's a Sefer HaChaim, there's a Sefer HaMaves, and there's the Sefer HaBeinonim. And as the Rambam says, most of us find ourselves in that middle category. I'm not a tzaddik, but Baruch Hashem, I'm also not a Rasha Gamor. And this becomes the power of Aseres Mitzvah, to try to shift myself from being a Beinoni, from being a middle of the rotor, ultimately again to becoming a tzaddik. Now, I'll just point out, and we have to move on, is the Gemara says, Zachu. if the Benoni has a schus. What's the schus? What schus does the Benoni need? What schus? Now remember, the Gemara doesn't say, so zechut can mean anything. Right? Zechut can mean if you're a Benoni, that means the scales are perfectly even. All I need is what? Right? Anything. The Rambam points out, in the Rambam's version of this Gemara, the Rambam says, Asu tshuva nechtavin l'chaim. According to the Rambam, it is not enough to do any mitzvah. According to the Rambam, it's not enough to do any mitzvah. It's only tshuva that moves the needle for the Benoni. So asks the Mishnah Lamelech, who's the Perish on the Rambam, why does the Rambam say tshuva? Any mitzvah should be enough to tilt the scales. And the Mishnah Lamelech says what the Rambam is teaching us something so incredible, that during Aseret Yemei Tshuva, it's Dirshu Hashem B'himatzo. The Ribono Shel Olam is so present, that failure to take advantage of the opportunity to do tshuva is in and of itself a chait. Failure to take advantage of the opportunity to do tshuva is in and of itself a chait. And therefore it's not any mitzvah that's going to tilt the scales for the Benoni. It dafka has to be tshuva. But again, I just want to point out that in Rav Krus Bedoi's model, that's not necessarily the case. In Rav Krus Bedoi's model, zachu just means all the Benoni needs to do is something. Just interesting, something to keep in mind. Rabbi Mikra, both say, what's the psukim that support this idea of the 3-book model? Mikra, Yimachu Misefer Chaim, Vim Sadikim Aichtovu, Yimachu Misefer Zeh Sefer Shal Rishon. So that we erase from the Sefer that refers to the Sefer Rishon Gimurim. Chaim Zeh Sefer Shal Tzadikim, Vim Sadikim Aikasevu Zeh Sefer Shal Beinonim. Good. Radnach Rabbi Yitzchok Mehacha, Vim Ayin Mechinina Misifracha Asher Kasafta, by Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if you don't forgive Klal Yisrael, then ultimately, again, erase me from the Sefer that you have written. So the Gemara says, what does that refer to? Mechinina zeh sifran shal rishonim. Misifracha zeh sifran shal tzadikim. Asher kasafta zeh sifran shal beinonim. Beautiful. Tanya. Peshame omrim. Gimel kidos hin liyom adin. There are 3 groups when it comes to judgment on Rosh Hashana. Achas shal tzadikim gimurim, va'achas shal rishem gimurim, va'achas shal beinonim. Right, so we'll say there are tzadikim gimurim, rishaim gimurim, and beinonim. And we'll say, by the way, what's fascinating about the lack of textual symmetry? Think about this. Tzadikim are called gimurim. Rishaim are called gimurim. Beinonim, just beinonim. Why are both saying? Because the worst thing to be in life is a benoni gomer. A Benoni Gomer. You see, to be a Tzaddik Gomer, incredible. Even to be a Rasha Gomer, at least you're choosing a team. At least you're cultivating an identity. At least you know who you are. But to be a Benoni Gomer is to be someone who has through and through chosen a path of middle of the road mediocrity. Chazal cannot believe that there are people like that. I mean, unfortunately, there are people like that, right? There are unfortunately so many times we fall into the trap of being a Benoni Gomer. But in the eyes of Chazal, you got to choose a team. You could be a Benoni for a couple of days. You could be a Benoni, but by the time Yom Kippur comes, everyone chooses a team. And the truth is, even if you don't choose a team, your inaction is by definition choosing the team for you. You can't live life as a Benoni Gomer. The Gemara goes weiter. Tzadikim Gemara nechtava v'nechtava la'alter l'chaye olam. Tzadikim Gemurim are immediately inscribed in the book of eternal life. Now, by the way, what I want to point out is, if you notice, this brisa is a little bit, it's different than Rav Krus Bedoi. Right? Rav Krus Bedoi says that the tzadikim are ultimately, again, nechtavin v'nechtamin la'alter l'chayim. In this version, in this brisa, Beis Shammai says la'alter l'chaye olam. So I will say this is actually interesting because chaye olam doesn't necessarily have to refer to life in this world. Chaye olam could refer to olam haba as well. So what many find problematic with Rav Krus Bedoi is his framing of this as life in this world. But yet, interesting, according to Beis Shammai, it could very well be tzaddikim are automatically inscribed for Olam Haba. Now, how that Olam Haba impacts their Olam Hazeh is dependent on so many other external circumstances. Rishon Gemurim nechtavim and nechtamim la'alter leGehenom. Unfortunately, Rishon Gemurim are immediately inscribed and sealed for Gehenom. Shneimar v'rabbi misheni admas afar yakitzu ele lechaye olam ve'ele lecharfos lediron. Beinonim yardim legehenim. What happens to the Beinonim? The Beinonim ultimately again, they go to Gehenim, top of Yud Zayin. Okay, good. Umitzaftzifin va'olin. That was is incredible. So the Gemara says, what happens to the Beinonim? The Beinonim go down to Gehenim. Now here it's even clearer, right? Because once we're talking about Gehenim, we clearly see that in this brisa, we're not talking about the impact of divine judgment in life in this world, but rather talking about the impact of divine judgment in the world to come. So the tzaddikim go to Gan Eden, right? Chaye olam. The Rishaim go to Gehenim, and the Beinonim, what happens to them? They also go down to Gehenim. Yardim leGehenim, umitzaftzifin, top Rashi, Yud Zayin Amdal, mitzaftzifin, tzoakim ubochim mitochi surin sha'achaz va'olin. The Beinonim go down to Gehenim for just a moment. Mitzaftzifin means they cry out va'olin, and then they come. Which we'll say was what the Gemara is explaining, that the Beinonim need some type of kapara, right? They need some type of atonement for their sins. How do they achieve that atonement? They go down to Gehenim for just a little bit. They go down to Gehenim, suffer in Gehenim, purged from their sins, and then ultimately are able to rise up to Gan Eden. Shneimar, ve'avesi es hashlishis ba'is, v'tzaraftim kisrof as hakesef, u'bachantim kibachones hazav. Hu yikra b'shmi va'ani elene oso. So we'll say again over here, the imagery of the pasuk is I will take the third group and essentially again I will forge them in the fire. So again, the Navi Zechariah. And the Gemara is understanding that this is a reference to the fact that the Beinonim have to spend even just a little bit of time. Rashi calls it sha'achas, which can mean a moment, which just means a small amount of time to suffer a bit in Gehenim, be purged of their sins, and then go up to Olam Haba. So the Gemara says, Va'aleihem amra Chana, and about this third group, the Beinonim, Chana said, Hashem memis u'mechaye, morid sha'ol vaya'al. So when Chana is talking about the way that Hashem gives life, or Hashem takes life, Hashem gives life, Morid Sha'ol, he takes them down to the depths. Sha'ol is often a reference to Gehenim, Vayal, and brings them back up. So the bringing back up, going down, bringing back up, says Chana, is a metaphor for the plight of the Beinoni. Beis Hillel, what's an incredible Gemara? Beis Hillel says, the Rav Chesed, what does it mean when it says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Rav Chesed? I will say, we often translate Rav Chesed as abundant in kindness. Abundant in kindness. What does that mean? Mate klape chesed. What that means, I will say, take a look at Rashi. Mate klape chesed. Hawil umechza umechza. Hey mate sachel tzad schus v'nyor the kenem. What says this? So basically this. We'll say we're most focused on the Beinoni, right? Because the Beinoni, out of all three categories, is the most intriguing, right? Tzadikim are tzadikim, and Rishaim are Rishaim. However, we're defining these categories, but the Beinoni are the individuals who really are most impacted by the Yamim Noraim. So Beis Hillel says, the pasuk says, Rav Chesed Baruch Hu was abundant in kindness, which means what? The Beinoni, right? The imagery of the Beinoni is that his scales are exactly equal. So Rav Chesed means Mate Klape Chesed. HaKadosh Baruch Hu tilts the scales of the Beinoni in a favorable way. HaKadosh Baruch Hu helps the Beinoni in judgment, tilting his scales in a favorable way. V'aleim Amar David, Ahafti Ki Yishma Shemes Koli. About them, David HaMelech said, I love it. Ahafti, we'll see what that actually means. It means, I am beloved, or I am beloved because HaKadosh Baruch Hu hears my voice. V'aleim Amar David, Kol HaParsha Kula, Dalosi V'li Yehoshia. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has saved me or drawn me out, and He is my salvation. Again, we're going to define all of this in just a moment. The Gemara says, however, so we'll say all that's about the Beinoni. Poshe Yisrael Begufan, Jews who sin with their bodies. Now we'll discuss exactly what this means. Uposhe Umos Olam Begufan, or Gentiles who sin with their bodies. Yardin leGehenim, they go down to Gehenim. V'nidonin ba Yud Beis Chodesh. They spend 1 year, 12 months in Gehenim. They will say 12 months is the maximum time for most Rishayim in Gehenim. Some spend longer. La'achar Yud Beis Chodesh, after 12 months, Gufan Kala, the body is disintegrated. V'nishmasan nisrafas, their neshamas are incinerated. V'ruach mifazrasan tachas kapos raglei hatzadikim. And ultimately, again, the ruach, their spirit, is scattered underneath the feet of tzadikim. Shne'emar va'asosem risham kiu efer tachas kapos ragleihem. So we'll say, so remember again, this is referring to another category of people, what we call Poshe Yisrael Begufan, Jews who sin with their bodies, Gentiles who sin with their bodies, they go down to Gehenna, but don't come up. Don't come up. Now again, we'll discuss what type of Aveira specifically we're talking about over here. Aval Aminin. So we'll say now there's another category of sinners. Minin. Rashi says, what are Minin? Ha'anoshim asher hafchu divrei Elokim Chaim l'ra, kigon tzedukim ubaytusim. According to Rashi, Minin are people who distort the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Actively and purposely distort the word of God. That's Minin. The Gemara says, Masuros, Amoser. Moser, right? Rashi says again, these are Jews who intentionally turn over other Jews to despotic governments in order either that their property is seized or ultimately again that their lives are taken. Vapikarsim. And apikarsim. What's apikarsim? We'll say this is fascinating. Look how Rashi defines an apikores. Mevaza talmidei chachamim. So we'll say, I want to point out, by the way, the Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva quotes this Gemara again. He gives different definitions for each of these things. So for now, for our purposes, they were just going with Rashi. That ultimately Minin means someone who distorts Torah. Mosaros are someone who gives over Jews to the hands of a despotic government. And an apikores, says Rashi, is a person who disparages Torah scholars. That's an apikores. Incredible. These individuals, shekafru b'Torah, or someone who, again, in general, negates the authenticity of Torah. Shekafru b'tchias hamesim, someone who does not believe in the resurrection of the dead. Shepirshu medarchei tzibor, a person who has separated himself from the community and lives outside of the bounds of communal norms. Vishenasnu chitasam ba'aretz Chaim, or a person who instills his fear in the land of the living. Again, we'll discuss all of these things. Vishechatu vishechtu es harabim, or a person who sinned and caused others to sin along with him. Kigon Yeravam ben Nevat v'chaverav, like Yeravam ben Nevat, right, who was the first king over the split kingdom of Yehuda and Yisrael. He built the golden calves, causing the Jews to worship idolatry. Yardin leGehenim. If Chatz Shalom person falls into one of these categories, person goes down to Gehenna after they die, v'nidonin ba l'dorei doros, and they remain in Gehenna for all eternity. So we'll say what's interesting is as follows: Shnei Amar vayitzur pigri arashim aposhim Gehenna kala v'hein einam kala. Gehenna could cease to exist, but yet ultimately, again, the suffering of these people will not stop. Shnei Amar v'tzurum levalo sha'ol mevazal v'chol kach lama. Why is, so we'll say, so before we get to this, so what you see essentially is you have three different categories, right? The Beinonim, right, leaving aside Rishon and Tzadikim, right? The Beinonim go down to Gehenna for a little bit, and ultimately again are purged and then come back up. We then see that Jews, Chote Yisrael, Poshe Begufan, Jews who sin with their body, or ultimately Gentiles who sin with their body. We'll see what Averos are talking about over here. Go get down to Gehenna for 12 months. After 12 months, their neshamas disintegrate and are placed underneath the feet of the tzaddikim. Now, both say, interestingly enough, the Gemara sees that quote unquote as a good thing. Why is it a good thing? Because they're no longer suffering for eternity in Gehenna. And then there's the third category of people whose transgressions are so severe that ultimately, again, their eternity is in Gehenna. So the Gemara says, "V'chol kach lama." Why is the punishment so severe for this last category? Because ultimately, we'll say this is incredible, because they caused the Beis HaMikdash to be destroyed. Now, both said the Maharsha points out that's fine if you lived in a generation where there was a Beis HaMikdash. What about if you're living now? So Maharsha says they caused the Beis HaMikdash to be destroyed and prevent it from being rebuilt. I will say, which is actually pretty incredible, because what you begin to see from this list is the list of the most despicable types of behaviors within Yiddishkeit, which is really something absolutely incredible. I will say, if you notice, what's missing from this list is not any particular Averos, right? What's missing from this list are corrupt mindsets, right? A person who distorts Torah, a person who mistreats other Jews, a person who disparages Talmidei Chachamim, right? Causing other people to sin. It's fascinating to see in this list what Chazal deemed to be the most egregious forms of behavior. The Gemara says, Shneimar, Mizvulo, Vein Zvul, Ela Beis Hamikdash, Shneimar, so Bano Banisi Beis Zvulach, Valeb Amar Chana, Hashem Yachasu Merivav, Amar Rabbi Yitzchok bar Avin, Upneim Dom L'Shuli Kedera. And when they're in Gehenna, their face resembles the bottom of a blackened pot. V'amarava, Ve'inhu Mishapiri Shapiri B'nei Mechuza. It's interesting. So Rava says, by the way, you know who's also in Gehenna? The wealthiest people of Mechuza. So it's interesting. So Rava says sometimes it's the people who lead the most pampered lives that are often most prone to sin, and therefore are most often the residents of Gehenna. Scary statement. Umakarian b'nei Gehenna, and they're called b'nei Gehenna. Amar Beis So we'll say so again. So that's just so you're following the progression. This is like pretty heavy sugya. How do we get into this? This was just the extension of the Beinonim sugya. Remember again, once we mentioned Gehenna by the Beinonim and spoke about Gehenna being as a temporary stop for the Beinonim to purge them from their Averos, that led to a more global discussion about Gehenna, who goes to Gehenna, the duration of time in Gehenna. The Gemara now switches back to Tshuva. Amar Mar, Beis Hillel Omrim, V'Rav Chesed, Mata Klape Chesed. So we'll say this is beautiful. So now we're going to dissect the brisa above. So we'll say all of this was a brisa. This is all Beis Hillel. So now let's analyze. So Beis Hillel said, Rav Chesed, what do you think God is abundant in Chesed? Mata Klape Chesed. It means that for the Benoni, he tilts the scales in the direction of Chesed. That's Rav Chesed. But one second, but the pasuk says, I'll bring the third group, the Beinonim, into Gehenna, which sounds like the Beinonim are going to Gehenna. So what does it mean? Kadosh Baruch Hu tilts the scales in their favor. Hasan beposhe Yisrael begufan. So the Gemara says, that's talking about Jews who sin with their bodies. Poshe Yisrael begufan, vaha amrit le, leslu takanta. But you said, poshe Yisrael begufan, there's no remedy for them, right? That's a group ultimately that goes to Gehenna, and then the Neshama disintegrates after 12 months. Ki leslu takanta barov avonos. So we'll say, when is there no takana? If a person has a majority of sins, and amongst those sins is a sin that one did with their body, again, we'll discuss what that is, then ultimately for that individual, there is no redemption. Ultimately, again, here it's half and half. And included in the half of Eros is this Poshe Yisrael Begufan. So the Gemara says, Lo sagilei dalav aveisesh. Such a person needs Gehenna in order to go ahead and affect some level of atonement. Ve'im lav. But ultimately, again, if there's no situation of a person being a Poshe Yisrael Begufan, then what? V'Rav Chesed, Mata Klape Chesed. So ultimately, again, it's supposed to say, assuming that a person is a Benoni, and in their Benoni Averos tally, they don't have a sin committed with their body. Again, we'll discuss specifically which sin Chazal are referring to over here. Then Rav Chesed, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tilts the scales towards chesed, towards abundant kindness. Valem Amar David, Ahavti ki yishma Hashem. First one, I will say, and about them, David HaMelech said, Ahavti, literally means again, I love ki yishma Hashem, that Hashem hears. Darash Rava Maidich Sev Ahavti ki yishma Hashem. Listen to how beautiful this is. Amra Knesses Yisrael Lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ribono shel Olam. Emase ani ahuva lefanecha. Kadosh Baruch Hu, when am I beloved before you? Bizman sha'ata shomea kol tachanunai. When am I beloved before you? When you hear my supplications. See, Rabbi is saying, the greatest demonstration of divine love for us is the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is willing to listen. You see, we often think that the measure of divine love is based on how much HaKadosh Baruch Hu answers. You love me as much as you give me. David HaMelech says, that's not the case. Ahavti ki yishma Hashem. I know that I'm beloved because you listen to me. The mere fact that the King of Kings takes the time to listen to my tefillos, takes time to listen to my supplications, that in and of itself is the greatest demonstration of love. So the Gemara says, Dalosi v'li yoshia. What does this phrase mean? Afal pisha dala ani min mitzvos. Even though I'm impoverished from mitzvos, I'm poor, I don't have mitzvos. Dalosi li na'aloshia. It's worth it to save me. So we say, what do we say to Kadosh Baruch Hu? I know that I don't look like that much right now, but give me a chance. Give me a chance, and I promise I will show you that I am redeemable, I'm salvageable, and it's worth it to invest in me. So beautiful. We'll both say, what is this category of Jews who sin with their bodies? What is that referring to? So, Amarav Karkafta delo manach tefillin. Wow. Someone who doesn't wear tefillin. Someone who doesn't wear tefillin is considered to be a person who is sinning with their body. And I will say, by the way, that's the category that Chazal said goes to Gehenna, and ultimately the neshama is there for 12 months and then it disintegrates. Now Tosas says, what is this talking about? The person who doesn't wear tefillin? So Tosas points out, it's someone who is like a conscientious objector to tefillin. Not so, because Tosas says, let's say a person doesn't wear tefillin because they have bodily issues and they can't keep a clean body. Or a person doesn't know about the mitzvah of tefillin. Right? Or a person is just not knowledgeable. So such a person that is called a poshei shabakuf says, no, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about someone who knows about tefillin, who knows what he's supposed to be doing, but doesn't do it. That's called Poshei Yisrael Begufan. That is called someone who sins with their body, to which, again, the Gemara says that's the person who goes to Gehenna ultimately for 12 months, and then the neshama disintegrates. Very strong. We'll say, by the way, it's fascinating that that's how Gemara defines, right? I could have thought of so many better things than that, right? I mean, not better. I don't mean better. But like, we'll say, but isn't that incredible? So what does it tell you? What does it tell you? You see, a person who doesn't put on tefillin in the morning, what's happening here is my day, tefillin is a bris, tefillin is a covenant. And when I don't start my day by solidifying, reinforcing, and concretizing that covenant, there's something missing in my neshama. There is a huge deficiency in my ruchnius. So the Gemara says such a person like that is called one who sins with their body. By the ummos, by the nations of the world. So what is it? Amarav Avera. It means immorality. So by Jews, it's not wearing tefillin. By non-Jews, it's engaging in immorality. That's what it means to be poshea begufan. Vishenasnu chitasam ba'aretz Chaim. We'll say, what does it mean? Now we're going through the whole list of people who, again, spend eternity in Gehenna. What does it mean? They instilled fear in the land of the living. Who is that? Amar of Chista, Zeparnes Hamatel Ema Yisrael Atzibor. This is a leader who instills fear unnecessarily in the community, in his constituents. Shalom v'shem shamayim. So we'll say, fear could sometimes be, right? Fear for the sake of heaven. There could be an important fear that motivates people to do the right thing. This is talking about a leader who uses his influence to instill fear for no good reason other than probably, his ego or something else like that. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Marav, both says it's incredible. Any leader, and both say this is not just like a rabbinic leader. Parnes is someone who's in charge of the community. Any leader who uses his influence to instill fear, not for the sake of heaven, Eina roa ben Talmud Chacham, will not have a son who is a Talmud Chacham. Now I will say, the truth is, that's actually not such a chiddush. Because any person, essentially, who leads with an iron hand, probably leads his community and leads his family with an iron hand. And there's nothing that goes in and turns children off more from HaKadosh Baruch Hu and from Ruchnius than unnecessary sternness. Obviously, again, you have to have discipline in your home, and there has to be rules, and it can't be, and I will say, one of the greatest things people think today is if you impose rules on your children, you're going to turn them off from Yiddishkeit, right? I can't tell my kid what to do because he's going to go off the derech. If you don't tell your kid what to do, he will go off the derech, right? Children need direction, and children need discipline, and children need rules, and children need ramifications. But parenting is this very fine line, because if you parent with an iron hand, right? If a child feels stifled and suffocated in the home, then that chas v'shalom has terrible impact as well. So if this guy is leading his community and instilling fear unnecessarily, chances are he's doing the same thing at home. And if he's doing the same thing at home, then unfortunately he's not going to raise a child who loves Torah and mitzvahs. Let's go back there. So the Gemara says, this is so much incredible Gemara. So Beisila Omrim, V'Rav Chesed, Mate Klape Chesed. So remember again, Beisila said before, what does Rav Chesed mean? Rav Chesed means Chadosh Baruch Hu tilts the scales in the direction of Chesed. So how does he do that? Abba said, listen to this Gemara, first of the widest lines. Heichi Avid. Right? So I'll say, how does the Chadosh Baruch Hu tilt the scales? Rabbi Eliezer Omer Kovsho. Rabbi Eliezer says what he does is he pushes down the side of the Aver. So Rabbi said, remember again, the Benoni has equal scales. Rav Chesed, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is abundant in judgment, which means HaKadosh Baruch Hu tilts the scales in a favorable fashion. The Gemara is literally asking, how does Hashem tilt the scales? Rabbi Eliezer says, Kovsho, he pushes down the side of Averus. he pushes down the side of Averos. I'm sorry, the side of mitzvahs, excuse me. Pushes down the side of mitzvahs, right? Kovsho, Shneimar, Yoshuv Yirachamenu, Yichbosh Avonosenu. Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina Omer, no say. Rabbi Yossi Chanina says, no. What does he do? He lifts up the side of the Averos. Right, do you see the distinction here? So one opinion says he pushes down the mitzvahs, showing that the mitzvahs are heavier. The other opinion says he lifts up the side of Averos, thereby making the mitzvahs look like they are heavier. Shnei Amar, no se avon va'over al pesha. Rabbi say there is such incredible profundity in that Gemara. What kind of machlokes is this? So Rabbi say what it's talking about is how HaKadosh Baruch Hu views us, but there's also an incredibly important thing about how we view each other. So Rabbi say the opinion that says when Hashem looks at me, I'm a Benoni, and what does Hashem do to my scales? Kovesh. He pushes down my mitzvahs, which means that when the Ribono Shalom looks at me, he focuses on my good. The pushing down, the weighing down of the mitzvahs means HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at me, but he chooses to focus on the good in me. He chooses to put more weight on the good that I possess. That's Kovesh. What's Nosei? Nosei means diminishing the weight of my Averos. Recognizing that my Averos do not define the totality of who I am. That's the lifting up of the Averos Kiviyachol, making them lighter than they are. And I will say, what an incredible way to view other people as well. To adopt these two mindsets, Kovesh and Nosei. That when looking at other people, Kovesh, push down their mitzvahs. Identify them ultimately again by the good that they have. Place emphasis on weight on the good. And Nosei, everybody makes mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. But ultimately, make the mistakes a little less, a little lighter. Push them up. Don't define the person. Don't define the person by the totality of their mistakes. This is how HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at us, and this is how we're supposed to look at others. Incredible. So much more to say. We'll have to go weiter. Turn to the Rabbi Shmuel. Ma'aver Rishon, v'cheini amida. What HaKadosh Baruch Hu does is, Ma'aver Rishon means that ultimately, again, when the Aveira first comes, person commits an Aveira, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't put the Aveira on the scale immediately. Right? So when the first Aveira comes along, that Aveira is kept off the scale. V'cheini amida. Amar Rava, v'na'avon atzma eno nimchak. Even though HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't put it on the scale, he also doesn't erase it. So the Gemara says, De'ika ruba avonos machshe ba'ada. So this is incredible. What HaKadosh Baruch Hu says is, he keeps the first Aveira off the scales, but it's not erased. If it turns out that unfortunately I continue to sin, and therefore I possess a majority of sins, HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts that first one back on. But if at the end of the day I don't possess a majority of sins, HaKadosh Baruch Hu eradicates that first one. So the Gemara says, incredible Gemara. By the way, you admit, I just want to point out, the problem with the pace is not me. I just want to point this out. It's not me. It is Chazal's fault, right? Or the typesetter's fault. There's too much good Gemara in one blot of it. It's impossible. No, I don't know. I don't think any Daf Yomi around the world is getting through this Daf. I think I'm actually going faster than most. But okay. The Gemara says, any person, I will say, Ma'avir Amidosav, any person, Ma'avir Amidosav is a good phrase that doesn't easily translate. I'll use the word, Ma'avir Amidosav means you're mevater. You're mevater. You yield. Even when someone wrongs you, you let it go. That's what it means to be Ma'avir Amidosav. Literally, again, you're Ma'avir. You pass over your midos. Again, it doesn't translate well. I'm mevater. I yield. So the Gemara says, whoever is a yielding individual towards others, I don't hold a grudge, I don't hold animosity. Ma'avir la kol pshav. Chadosh Baruch Hu says, if you're ma'avir amidosav, you're mevater, you don't hold grudge, you don't hold animosity. When people wrong you, you let it go. Chadosh Baruch Hu says, if you do that for others, then I'll do that for you. Shneimar no se over va'over apesha. Lemi no se avon. To does HaKadosh Baruch Hu go ahead and literally lift up or erase sin? Lemisha over al pesha. To a person who is able to pass over wrong that is done to him. So I will say, if I am mevater, if I am forgiving, and I'm willing to yield and let go, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does the same for me. Rav Huna Rabbi Yoshua, we'll say, listen to this Gemara, incredible. Rav Huna Rabbi Yoshua chalash. Rav Huna Rabbi Yoshua became ill. Oh, Rav Papa let's listen to this story. Rav Papa came to visit him. And Rav Papa saw that Rav Huna was very ill. Amar lahu savisulu zavdasa. So Rav Papa, when he saw him, said, you know what, prepare the tachrichen. Prepare the tachrichen. Now both say, not good Bikur Cholim etiquette, right? Right, but ultimately, again, but nevertheless, he said, prepare the Tachrichin, because he saw that Rav Huna was so ill. L'sof itbach. Rav Huna, Baruch Hashem, was healed. Have a machsich Rav Papa lemechzeh. Rav Papa avoided him. Right? Understandably so, right? The last time they saw each other, Rav Papa was whispering, it's not looking good. Better prepare the Tachrichin. Right? And here Rav Huna got better. So Rav Papa was embarrassed. Amrlei my chazis. So they asked Rav Huna, you were right? What did you see when you were ill? Amrlei in hachiyava. So listen to this. So Rav Huna says, by the way, guys, Rav Papa was right. I was on death's door. I was ready to leave this world. And then I heard HaKadosh Baruch Hu say, listen to this Gemara. I heard HaKadosh Baruch Hu say, Ho'il v'lo mokim b'milei lo sakumu ba'adei. Since Rav Huna was not someone who held a grudge, who held animosity, was able to let things go. Therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Lo mokim milei, which literally means, Eno ma'amid amidosav. He did not stand his ground. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, we're going to forgive him, and we're going to let him live. I both say, this is what Rav Huna heard. He's on death's door. His neshama is about to be taken. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu say, let him live. Why? Because here is a man who was ma'avir amidosav. Here was a man who yielded. Here was a man who didn't walk around with animosity or anger or negativity towards another. Bless you. Even when he was legitimately wronged. And if he could let go, then we could let go of our din on him as well. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Shneimar nosi avon va'over al pesha, lemi nosi avon tu, does the Kadosh Baruch Hu go ahead and forgive sin la'over pesha, to someone who lets the wrongs committed against him pass over as well. Incredible. L'sheiris nachalaso. I will say, remember again, the pasuk goes on, right? And the pasuk says, l'sheiris nachalaso. Ultimately, again, it's the same pasuk. Mikel kamocha nosi avon va'over apesha l'sheiris nachalaso. So literally means to the remnant of his portion. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Acha bar Chanina alya v'kotzba. So we'll say this is like having the fatty tail but a thorn in it. Apparently, the tail of the animal was a delicacy, right? So it's like getting the tail but having a thorn in it. In other words, you have the delicacy, but the delicacy is negatively impacted the presence of the thorn. What does that mean? L'sheiris nachalaso v'lo l'chol nachalaso. Now we'll say, you see, not everybody attains this level of forgiveness. Not everybody attains the mikel kamocha no se avon va'over al pesha. Only the sheiris nachalaso, only some merit. V'lo l'chol nachalaso, only base. Okay, good. Right, we'll say ultimately again, who attains this level of divine forgiveness? This is incredible. L'sheiris nachalaso, which means what? L'mi shemesim asmo kishirayim. To someone who makes himself like leftovers. Now we'll say, what does that mean to someone who makes himself like leftovers? So the way to read the pasuk is, mi al kamocha, who is like you Hashem, no se avon va'over al pesha, who goes ahead and literally, no se avon lifts away sin. So again, we define over al pesha. Over al pesha means for someone who is able to let the iniquities against him slide. I don't hold the grudge. I don't hold animosity. I don't hold on to amadra medosav. I'm mevater. So it says, by the way, even so, not everyone merits divine forgiveness. Who gets it? L'sheiris nachalaso. Which is to only people make themselves like sharim, like leftovers. But we'll say, what's the chap of leftovers? If there's one thing, there's one midah leftovers never have. It's what? Gaiva. Leftovers never have gaiva, right? When there's leftovers come out of the refrigerator on Sunday and sometimes Tuesday, right? So I said, they're never praying out. Look at me, right? Yeah, look at you. Right? You've been on the table since Shabbos, right? There's no gaiva. There's no gaiva to leftovers. Sometimes in life, you have to make yourself like shirayim. Sometimes you have to make yourself like leftovers. We'll say, you see the dominant theme on this Gemara happening over and over. Gaiva. Gaiva is the Achilles heel, and anova, humility, is the key to unlock greatness and unlock divine forgiveness. Absolutely incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. Rav Huna Rami Ksiv. Rav Huna contrasted Psukim. On one hand it says, Tzadik Hashem b'chol d'rachav. It says Hashem is a tzaddik in all of his ways. And I will say, tzaddik means what? Tzedek is justice. God is a God of justice. The chassid b'chol ma'asav. Chassid, I will say, is what? What's chassid? By the way, let's see, this is incredible, but just in general. What is a chassid? A chassid is someone who is a bal chesed. Right? The chassid is not defined by what you wear. Being a real chassid means you are a Baal Chesed. So then it calls the Kadosh Baruch Hu a chassid b'chol ma'asav. Chassid. So which one is it? Is it Kadosh Baruch Hu? Is it Kadosh Baruch Hu a tzaddik, justice, or is he a chassid, a Baal Chesed? We'll say two very opposite midos. Betchila tzedek, we'll say is incredible. In the beginning, when the Kadosh Baruch Hu approaches judgment, he approaches judgment through the lens of tzedek, strict justice. When he realizes that's not going to work, ulubasov chassid. He becomes a chassid, right? He becomes a Baal Chesed. So beautiful. Starts with justice, but when he realizes it's just not going to work for us, he becomes a Baal Chesed. So Rabbi Elazar Ramiksiv, Ulucha Hashem Chesed, says, Chash Baruch Hu, the middle of Chesed belongs to you. Ksiv, ki atot tishalim ki ish ki ma'asehu. Then the pasuk says, you reward each person, you repay each person in accordance with their deeds, which sounds like justice. So once again, are you chesed or are you justice? Betrisa, the Gemara says, ki ata teshalim ki ma'asehu, ulubasof ulacha Hashem chesed. Same idea. Betrila, in the beginning, Chash Baruch Hu judges us with justice, but when he sees that's not going to yield favorable results, he switches over to chesed. Incredible. So the Gemara says, ilfi, va'amrle ilfa ramiksiv. Some say it was ilfi, some say it was ilfa. Contrast to the following psukim. Rav chesed, so pasuk says, Chash Baruch Hu has abundant kindness. Uksiv, ve'emes betrila, so the Gemara says, "Uksid ve'emes betrila ve'emes levasof v'rav chesed." So we'll say, same idea. So which one is it? Is it chesed? Is it tzedek? To which the Gemara says, "Uksid ve'emes." So betrila ve'emes. In the beginning, Hashbaruch Hu starts with truth. Ulevasof v'rav chesed. Which I will say, see something absolutely amazing. Hashbaruch Hu starts almost as a purist. It's an incredible metaphor for life. Hashbaruch Hu starts as a purist. Right? And as a purist, he wants to judge the world based on justice. He wants to judge us based on emes. But then the purist becomes a pragmatist. What's the right word? Pragmatic. He becomes pragmatic. Right? And therefore he switches over to chesed. Which I will say is such an incredible metaphor for how we're supposed to live as well. Because many times in life, we begin almost with a purist mindset, which is very beautiful. Only one problem. It doesn't work in life, right? Unadulterated idealism that is not tempered by realism doesn't work in this world. So if you have this idealistic or purist approach to life, it's not going to work. You have to become realistic. V'haraya, Kadosh Baruch Hu starts with emes, starts with tzedek, but then recognizes it needs to be chesed. Beautiful. Vaya'avar Hashem apanav vayikra. It's just incredible. HaKadosh Baruch Hu passed by Moshe Rabbeinu and he called out, this is the Yud Gimel Midos. Hashem Ke'orachon V'chanon. Amar Rabbi Yochanan said, Il Mali Mikra Kasu V'Efshar La'omro. Had the pasuk not said it, we couldn't, right? If the pasuk had not said it, we would not have been able to articulate this idea. Melamed, Rabbi say, what happened over here? Melamed shenis atef HaKadosh Baruch Hu kishliach tzibor. HaKadosh Baruch Hu kiviyachol wrapped himself in a talis, just like the shliach tzibor, just like the chazan. V'heralo leMoshe seder tefillah, and he showed Moshe how to daven the Yud Gimel Midos. Yankee, thank you. Right, so he showed HaKadosh Baruch Hu how to go ahead and that. So we'll say, isn't this incredible? That not only does HaKadosh Baruch Hu give Moshe Rabbeinu the Yud Gimel Midos, but what? He models for him how to daven them. He models for him how to daven them. The Haralo, the Moshe Seder Tefillah. Amar lo, Kozman Sh'Yisrael Chotin. Whenever Klal Yisrael mess up, whenever we sin, Yasu L'fanei Keseder Hazeh. Tell them to say the Yud Gimel Midos, the 13 attributes. Va'ani mocha lahem. Wow. A divine haftacha, a divine promise. Whenever Klal Yisrael messes up, tell them to say the Yud Gimel Midos. Hashem Ke'orach V'Mechan Rosh Baruch Hu says, I promise, I will forgive them. So we'll say now the Gemara goes through the Yud Gimel Midos. Here we go. Hashem. Why did it say Hashem twice? To which the Gemara says, Ani hu kodim shiachta adam. I am Hashem before man sins, and I am Hashem after man sins. If you look at Rashi, Rashi says, Midas rachim ani merachim kodim sheyachta, v'ani merachim achar sheyachta im yashuv. So Rashi says, I am Hashem who is compassionate before man sins, and I am compassionate after man sins. Now both say, ask the Maharsha, you look at this Maharsha and it's not on your own, but the Maharsha says, why do I need divine compassion before I sin? Because the Maharsha says the world cannot exist without HaKadosh Baruch Hu's rachamim. Our entire existence is based on HaKadosh Baruch Hu's compassion. So there's Hashem before I sin. There's the Midas HaRachamim before I sin. The midas harachamim after I sin is the divine attribute of compassion, which allows me to get my life back on the rails, to do tshuva and to start again. So the Gemara goes weiter. What does it mean, kel rachum v'chanun? Literally a God who is compassionate, right? Merciful and compassionate. There is a covenant that has been effected with you, Gimel Midos, that you never come back empty-handed. Shneamar, hine anochi kores bris. I am hereby effecting a covenant with you. Hereby effecting a covenant with you that if you say to your Gimel Midos bekavana, ultimately, again, you will always come back with forgiveness. I will say, unfortunately, we have to stop here for today. There's so much more. But I think we're going to start tomorrow morning at 5:45 again in Yirtzeit Hashem. We will catch up in Yirtzeit Hashem by the end of tomorrow. Oh, no. We'll catch up in a couple of days in Yirtzeit Hashem. But again, the journey is quite beautiful and wonderful. Shkach, I will say.
Jeremy Stramer lost his mom.